My name is Deborah Clark, and 3 months ago my father shouted ungrateful at a family dinner. That word stung like a slap across the face, echoing through the room as I stood frozen, staring at the man who raised me. I'm a 35-year-old architect, living in a sleek, hard-earned apartment in Omaha's Old Market, a place I built from years of late nights and relentless hustle. But that night, my family demanded I trade it for my sister's cramped, rundown house in Florence, all because she craved more space to impress her friends. When I refused, my father's voice boomed, accusing me of betraying the family, while my sister's glare burned with entitlement. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, revealing a truth I'd long ignored. My family saw my success as theirs to claim. That dinner wasn't just a meal. It was the moment I realized I'd been fighting their manipulation my entire life. What unfolded next, a viral video, a legal battle, and a fight for my own boundaries changed everything. I'm sharing this story not for pity, but to unravel how I broke free from their control and found a life that's truly mine. Stick around to hear how one explosive night exposed their true colors and pushed me to take a stand I never thought possible. If you've ever faced family pressure that made your blood boil, drop your story in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more raw, real drama you won't want to miss. Growing up in Dundee, I always felt like an afterthought. Our modest house in that quiet Omaha neighborhood held memories that still prickle with resentment when I look back. My parents poured their attention into my sister Brenda as if she were the only one who mattered. When I was in my teens, my father Harold surprised her with a shiny new sedan for her high school graduation, while I got a handshake and a lecture about working harder. The car, a sleek red thing that cost thousands, became Brenda's pride, parked boldly in our driveway for neighbors to admire. Meanwhile, I biked to school rain or shine, saving every penny from my part-time job at a local diner to cover my own expenses. Brenda's life seemed to glide on a cushion of their support. After she moved out, my mother Margaret insisted on covering her rent $2,000 over a few months when Brenda fell behind in her shabby Florence apartment. I was in college then, scraping by on scholarships and late-night study sessions, but nobody offered to ease my burden. Instead, Margaret sat me down one evening, her voice firm, and told me to share half my scholarship money to clear Brenda's credit card debt. That moment burned into my memory, the expectation that my hard-won achievements were somehow owed to my sister, as if my sacrifices were just a family resource to tap into. The pattern never stopped. Whenever I pushed back, my father, Harold, would shake his head, his tone sharp, saying I was too independent, too unwilling to help family. Once, when I refused to lend Brenda money for a new phone, he called me selfish, his words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. My successes, good grades, a promotion at my first job, went unnoticed, unless they could somehow benefit Brenda. I remember landing my first architectural internship, a grueling role that demanded 60-hour weeks. I was thrilled, but at dinner that night, the conversation revolved around Brenda's latest job interview, her charm, her potential. My milestone barely earned a nod. The unfairness grew heavier with time. Brenda would breeze into our parents' house, regaling them with stories of her social life, while I sat quietly, my contributions dismissed as expected. Once, after I'd saved enough to buy a used car, Margaret suggested I let Brenda borrow it for a weekend trip since hers was in the shop again. I said no, explaining I needed it for work, but the disapproval in their eyes made it clear whose needs came first. That sense of being overlooked wasn't just a fleeting sting. It was a constant weight, shaping how I saw myself in their world. Looking back, I see how their favoritism warped my view of family. Every achievement I earned felt like it belonged to them, ready to be redirected to Brenda's endless needs. By my early 20s, I started to question why my efforts were never enough to earn their pride, why my sister's whims always trumped my boundaries. That realization didn't come easily. It took years of quiet resentment of watching my parents shower Brenda with support while I fought alone. Those moments built a wall inside me, one that would later help me stand firm when their demands grew bolder. By my early 30s, I'd built a life I was proud of. Enrolling at the University of Nebraska's architecture program became my first step toward independence, a choice driven by a hunger to create something lasting. To cover tuition, I worked 70 hours a week juggling classes with late-night shifts at a downtown Omaha coffee shop. Every paycheck went to books or fees, leaving no room for luxuries like dinners out or weekend getaways. Those grueling years taught me discipline, but they also carved a quiet resolve to prove my worth without relying on anyone else. After a decade of relentless saving, I bought my dream apartment in Old Market, a vibrant corner of Omaha, where historic brick buildings hummed with life. That purchase wasn't just a transaction. It marked the culmination of countless sacrifices, from skipping vacations to stitching together my own clothes to stretch every dollar. Owning that space with its high ceilings and view of the city's glow felt like a badge of my resilience. I'd carved out a place that was mine alone, free from the expectations that had shadowed my childhood. My career began to take shape in ways I hadn't dared to dream. I landed a project designing a community library in Omaha, a space meant to welcome everyone from kids to retirees. Pouring my heart into every blueprint, I watched the library rise, its clean lines and warm spaces earning praise from the city council. When they awarded me a local design prize at a small ceremony, the weight of that recognition hit me hard. For once, I felt seen for my work, not as a tool for someone else's needs. But that pride came with a sting. Brenda called a week after the award, her voice casual, asking for $1,500 to buy new furniture for her Florence home. She framed it as a small favor, saying her place needed a refresh to feel less cramped. I refused, explaining my savings were tied to my mortgage, but her tone sharpened, accusing me of hoarding my success. That conversation wasn't new. It echoed years of her expecting my help without offering gratitude. I hung up my hands, trembling, realizing how deeply her entitlement still cut. The loneliness crept in when I stood at that award ceremony, scanning the room for familiar faces. My parents didn't show up, not even a call or a text to acknowledge the milestone. My father once told me achievements were nice, but not everything, while my mother would redirect any praise toward Brenda's latest plans. Their absence that day wasn't a surprise, but it crystallized a truth: my victories meant little to them unless they served the family's demands. That realization fueled a shift inside me, a determination to protect what I'd built. Setting boundaries became my quiet rebellion. I stopped answering Brenda's texts about money, ignored her hints about helping family. Each refusal felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, though it came with guilt that gnawed at my resolve. I wasn't just saying no to her. I was rejecting the idea that my success existed for anyone but me. That choice, hard as it was, marked the start of a life where I defined my own worth, not by their approval, but by the strength I'd forged through years of standing alone. On a crisp October evening, I drove to my parents' house in Dundee. The familiar street lined with tidy lawns did little to ease the tension knotting my stomach as I pulled into their driveway. Inside, the dining room smelled of grilled steak, my mother's attempt at a warm family gathering, but the air felt heavy with unspoken expectations. My father sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, while my mother fussed over the plates, her smile strained. Brenda, dressed in a flashy jacket, lounged across from me, scrolling her phone with a smirk. The pretense of togetherness grated on me, especially after years of deflecting their demands on my hard-earned life. Conversation started lightly, with my mother asking about work in a tone that felt rehearsed. I answered briefly, mentioning a new project. but their nods were perfunctory, their eyes drifting to Brenda as she launched into a story about her latest social event. The shift was subtle, yet familiar, a reminder of how my achievements rarely held their focus. Then halfway through the meal my father cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on me, and declared that I should swap my old market apartment for Brenda's small house in Florence. His words landed like a demand, not a suggestion framed as a solution to Brenda's space problem. Brenda chimed in, her tone dripping with complaint, explaining how her cramped Florence home couldn't accommodate her friends or reflect her lifestyle. She needed my apartment, she said, to host gatherings and impress her social circle, as if my years of sacrifice were a mere stepping stone for her ambitions. My mother nodded in agreement, her expression urging me to comply as if this was a reasonable request. The audacity of their expectations stunned me into silence, my fork hovering over my plate as I processed the sheer entitlement behind their words. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice, and refused. I explained that my apartment was the result of a decade of relentless work, not a bargaining chip to be traded for Brenda's whims. My father's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he slammed his fork onto the table. He shouted that I was ungrateful, his voice booming through the room, accusing me of putting myself above family. Brenda, her eyes flashing with anger, pounded her fist on the table, sending a glass of water tipping over the liquid soaking the tablecloth. Her outburst wasn't just frustration, it was a performance meant to shame me into submission in front of everyone. The room fell silent, the weight of their fury pressing against me. I glanced at my mother, hoping for a flicker of support, but she looked away, her silence louder than any words. At that moment, a neighbor who'd been invited for dessert discreetly pulled out their phone, capturing the scene. I didn't notice until later, but the act would change everything. My father's accusation, Brenda's tantrum, and my mother's complicity burned into my mind, each moment sharpening the truth I'd long avoided. They didn't see me as an equal. They saw me as a resource, my success a tool to prop up Brenda's desires. I stood my chair scraping against the floor and walked out without another word. The cool night air hit my face as I reached my car, but it couldn't soothe the humiliation coursing through me. Their public attack wasn't just a family argument. It was a deliberate attempt to break my resolve, to make me feel small for daring to protect what I'd built. Driving away, I felt the sting of their betrayal, but also a clarity I hadn't expected. My family's demands had crossed a line, exposing their view of me as nothing more than a means to an end. That night wasn't just a breaking point. It was the moment I understood I had to fight for my own worth, no matter the cost. By early November, that dinner video was all over social media. The clip, captured by a neighbor who had stopped by for coffee, showed my father's face twisted in rage as he accused me of ingratitude, his voice echoing through the room, while Brenda slammed the table in fury. It started in local Omaha groups shared with captions calling out family entitlement, and within days it exploded across platforms, racking up thousands of views from people who recognized the pattern of demands disguised as love. The comments poured in, strangers sharing their own stories of relatives treating success like a shared bank account, their words validating the isolation I had felt for years. I met my friend Janet Ross for coffee downtown, her expression serious as she slid her phone across the table to show the video again. Janet, a freelance journalist with a sharp eye for toxic dynamics, pointed out how my family's behavior fit the classic signs of financial manipulation, where love came with strings attached to my wallet. She explained that their public outburst wasn't just anger, it was a calculated move to guilt me into compliance, a tactic she had seen destroy relationships in her reporting. Hearing her break it down so clearly lifted a fog I hadn't realized was there, making me see the dinner not as a one-off fight, but as the culmination of years of coercion. My father wasted no time reacting, sending an email that arrived in my inbox the next morning, his words dripping with blame for destroying the family's reputation. He demanded I post a public apology claiming the video painted him as a monster when all he wanted was fairness for Brenda. The message ignored his role in the explosion, focusing instead on how the online backlash embarrassed him at his auto shop, where customers now whispered about the angry dad from the video. Reading it left me shaking, not with fear, but with a cold clarity that his concern was for his image, not for the hurt he inflicted on me. Brenda took to social media herself, posting a long rant that tagged local pages, calling me a selfish jerk for refusing to share what I had worked so hard to earn. She painted herself as the victim stuck in a tiny house, while I hoarded space in my old market apartment, her words twisting the truth to garner sympathy from her followers. The post backfired spectacularly, drawing hundreds of replies condemning her entitlement and praising my refusal to cave. People shared screenshots of similar experiences, turning her defense into a spotlight on the very behavior she denied. The online criticism grew relentless, with forums dissecting every second of the clip, highlighting my father's threats and Brenda's aggression as examples of emotional abuse hidden behind family loyalty. Local commenters recognized the Dundee neighborhood, speculating about the auto shop's name, which amplified the pressure on my parents as word spread among their circle. The backlash wasn't just digital. It seeped into real life, making every notification a reminder that the world saw through their facade. I started documenting everything that day, saving my father's email, Brenda's post, and the flood of comments that supported my side. Screenshot after screenshot filled a folder on my computer, building a timeline of their attacks and the public's response. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself from further manipulation, gathering proof that their demands had always come with consequences for saying no. The process felt empowering, a way to turn their chaos into something I controlled. By mid-November, I decided enough was enough. The online storm over the dinner video had exposed my family's manipulation, but their refusal to back down pushed me to take a stand. I hired my lawyer, Carol Hughes, a property dispute specialist known for handling messy family conflicts with precision. Meeting her in her downtown Omaha office, I laid out the years of pressure to surrender my earnings, from childhood demands to the recent apartment swap attempt. Carol listened intently, her calm demeanor giving me confidence that my case for harassment wasn't just emotional venting, but a valid legal fight. She advised building a paper trail, something I had already started to show a pattern of coercion that crossed legal lines. The situation escalated when my mother showed up unannounced at my architecture firm, her face tight with urgency as she demanded I drop the lawsuit. Her voice trembled with a mix of panic and accusation, claiming my actions were tearing the family apart and shaming them in front of Dundee neighbors. I stayed composed, explaining that I was protecting my boundaries, but she kept pressing her words, echoing the same guilt trips I had heard for years. Before the conversation could spiral, the office security guard intervened, politely asking her to leave since she lacked an appointment. Watching her walk away, her shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a pang of sorrow, but no regret for standing firm. Brenda took a darker approach, flooding my phone with messages that grew increasingly hostile. One late-night text warned that I would regret betraying the family, her words laced with a venom that made my stomach churn. She accused me of orchestrating the video's spread to humiliate them, ignoring that I had no control over its viral reach. Each message felt like a jab meant to scare me into submission, but instead they hardened my resolve to push forward with the lawsuit. I saved every text, knowing they would strengthen my case by showing her intent to intimidate. My evidence folder grew thicker by the day, a grim collection of my father's accusatory emails, Brenda's threatening texts, and screenshots of her social media rants calling me selfish. I organized them meticulously, cross-referencing dates and platforms to create a clear timeline of their attempts to pressure me. The process wasn't just about legal preparation, it was a way to reclaim control, to turn their chaos into something I could fight with facts. Every email I printed, every post I archived felt like a step toward breaking free from their expectations. A colleague at work, noticing my distraction, pulled me aside one afternoon to warn about the risks of public perception. He pointed out that lawsuits against family could paint me as cold or vindictive in Omaha's tight-knit community where gossip traveled fast. His concern was genuine, but it underestimated my determination to stop the cycle of manipulation. I thanked him for his perspective, explaining that staying silent had only emboldened my family's demands for years. The risk of judgment paled against the cost of letting them erode my life further. Filing the lawsuit brought a strange sense of relief, like exhaling after holding my breath too long. For the first time, I felt I was fighting for myself, not just reacting to their attacks. The weight of their accusations still lingered, but it was overshadowed by a quiet strength that grew with each step I took. I wasn't just suing for harassment. I was reclaiming the right to define my worth free from their claims on my success. That clarity carried me forward, ready to face whatever came next. By December, the fallout hit my family hard. My father's auto repair shop, once a steady business in Dundee, lost 60% of its customers after the video spread, as locals recognized him from the viral clip and chose competitors instead. To cover mounting debts, he sold off half his equipment, leaving the shop a shadow of its former self, its bays eerily quiet where clanging tools once filled the air. The financial strain reshaped their lives, forcing my father to confront the consequences of his outburst in ways he hadn't anticipated. Brenda faced her own reckoning, losing her sales job when clients connected her to the video, their trust eroded by her public tantrum. Unable to afford her Florence home, she moved back in with my parents. Her belongings crammed into their spare room, a stark contrast to her boasts about needing space to impress friends. The humiliation of returning home seemed to silence her usual bravado, though I heard whispers from neighbors that she blamed me for her downfall, refusing to acknowledge her role in the mess. My mother bore the brunt of their struggles, picking up extra hours at her office job to keep the family afloat. Her days stretched long, her face etched with exhaustion when I glimpsed her at a grocery store, though we didn't speak. Their hardship weighed on me, stirring a guilt that clawed at my resolve, but I reminded myself that their choices, not mine, had led to this unraveling. The family I once knew was fracturing under the pressure of their own actions, a reality that felt both tragic and inevitable. Meanwhile, my career took a brighter turn with a contract to design an affordable housing complex in Omaha, a project that promised to transform lives in underserved neighborhoods. The local paper ran a feature praising my innovative approach, highlighting how my designs balanced beauty with practicality, a recognition that filled me with pride, unlike any I had felt before. Standing on the site, sketching plans under the winter sun, I found purpose in creating something meaningful, a stark contrast to the chaos my family's demands had once brought. I met David Ellis, an environmental engineer working on the same project, during a site visit that turned into a long conversation over coffee. His quiet confidence and genuine curiosity about my work steadied me, offering a perspective free from the baggage of my past. When I shared the guilt that lingered from my family's struggles, David listened without judgment, gently pointing out that protecting my own life didn't mean I wished them harm. His words helped me untangle the knot of responsibility I had carried for too long, allowing me to see my choices as strength, not betrayal. Janet sent me a link to an article about my father's shop, detailing how the boycott had forced him to downsize, a dry report that avoided mentioning her earlier support. She didn't need to say more. Her quiet gesture showed she understood the weight of this moment without revisiting our past talks. The article solidified what I already knew. The consequences my family faced were real, but they weren't my burden to carry. Each step I took forward felt like a reclaiming of my own story built on my terms. A year later, I stood on my balcony with a coffee. The city's hum below my old market apartment felt like a steady heartbeat, a reminder of the life I had built, despite everything. My mother's letter arrived months earlier, its words cold and final, declaring me no longer her daughter for pursuing the lawsuit and refusing to bend. The sting was sharp but brief. I chose to cut all contact, blocking their numbers and letting silence replace the chaos of their demands. That decision, though heavy, freed me from the weight of their expectations. My father, mother, and Brenda left Omaha under the crush of social pressure as neighbors and locals shunned them after the video's fallout. Brenda, however, stayed behind, clinging to her small Florence home, her dreams of grandeur humbled by the reality of her choices. I learned of their move through a former neighbor who mentioned their quiet departure, a stark contrast to the loud accusations they once hurled. Their absence left a void, but it also cleared space for me to breathe, unburdened by their relentless need to control my success. I channeled my energy into giving back, donating a portion of my earnings from the affordable housing project to an Omaha fund for low-income families. The act wasn't about erasing guilt, but about building something positive, a legacy that mattered more than the family approval I once craved. Knowing my work helped others find stability brought a sense of purpose that no argument could diminish, grounding me in a community that valued my contributions without strings attached. David and I got engaged in the spring, planning a small wedding in a park near Old Market, where we envisioned a simple ceremony surrounded by friends who saw me for who I was. His steady presence reminded me that love didn't demand sacrifice of my dreams, it supported them. As we sketched out our future, from shared hikes to late-night talks about sustainable design, I felt a joy that came from choosing a life aligned with my values, not someone else's expectations. Standing on that balcony, I found peace in the life I had crafted, one free from the need for my family's validation. Their rejection no longer defined me. Instead, it pushed me to redefine family as those who uplift without ultimatums. My journey taught me to stand firm, to choose myself without apology, and to find meaning in contributing to a world bigger than my past. Protecting personal boundaries is about respecting yourself, not selfishness. True family doesn't force you to sacrifice what you've worked hard to build. I learned that contributing to the community brings more value than seeking approval from those who don't respect you. Standing up for yourself creates a life rooted in authenticity, where your worth isn't tied to meeting others' demands, but to living true to your own values. Thank you all for following my story to the end. If you've faced family pressure, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and I'd love to hear them. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama stories. Your support keeps these narratives alive, so let's keep the conversation going with more tales of truth and resilience.